Good morning. Welcome to the second day of the NHS Confederation Conference, and welcome to Liverpool. The Confed was looking for a culturally authentic voice, so they got me to do this bit. I'm as bad as somebody told me that this would work because it was actually it was inputted by a Scouser, so they'd understand me. But I'm not quite sure that it's going to be like that. And the first day was great, wasn't it? At least I'm getting a laugh. The first day was great, wasn't it? I mean, can I just say you're laughing in all the wrong places? I've put proper pauses in here for you to laugh. Anyway, the first day was great, wasn't it? We had Rob. I thought Rob was great. I thought Rob was absolutely Rob. He was completely authentic, and loads and loads of people coming up to me saying what a great speech that Rob did. And somebody said to me, wasn't it really nice the way he engaged the audience by walking around like this and talking to people, and somebody said it was a bit of a Frank Sinatra thing, really, So that was great. And then we had Simon Stevens, and that was a real tour de force. God, there was so much content, it was great, He was fairly clear about his forward view, as he called it. And it's great to come to conferences like this, and ask leaders questions. I asked him a question about PACE and about specialised commissioning in mental health, and it's great to ask the questions. I'm really looking forward to the answer. And then we had Stuart Rose, and he was great too. And he reminded us that the NHS and Marks and Spencers they occupy the same space for people. For British people in terms of being an iconic brand and something that people trust. And I think that's right, and we've all got personal stories. My personal story is that earlier this year, as a result of kind of recurrent frontal lobe pain, I had to have an MRI scan, I went for the scan, it's like you're really anxious afterwards, waiting for the result. And in fact, I was thinking about this in terms of Marks and Spencers, because, the other night I was in the kitchen and I was in front of the microwave, and I felt that same wave of anxiety because I had a Marks and Spencers melting middle muffin in the microwave, and I thought, is the middle really going to melt? It was that same wave of anxiety that I had when I had my MRI scan. So I think Stuart Rose is right. Anyway. I'd like to introduce my colleagues who are going to be here with me talking about integration this morning. But before I do that, I just want to say that this morning's session, we want it to be an interactive session, so I hope you've brought some questions, otherwise it might be quite a short session. I'm keen to hear what the audience believes we mean by integration. Just what are we integrating? Are we integrating everything? Are we integrating some things? Are we integrating primary and secondary care, health and social care? The ministers talked of integration pioneers leading a quiet revolution. So, well, let's hope that's true, because it's long overdue. We need to move on from when joint working between health and social care was characterised by that cliche that other people have talked about, the suspension of mutual loathing in pursuit of a grant. I'm sure we've moved on from that, and I think we need to. So, first of all, I'd like to introduce two people who are going to join us and respond to the minister's speech this morning. So, can I introduce Steve Keld, Chair of NHS Bassetlaw CCG, co-chair of NHS Clinical Commissioners Leadership Group, and also he tells me his main job is being a GP when he's done all those other things, and also Carolyn Downs, Chief Executive of the Local Government Association since 2011, and can speak with experience as a former Chief Executive of Shropshire County Council. I'd like to invite you to join me on the stage. It's my pleasure this morning to thank you. It's my pleasure this morning to introduce a minister who chose a political career as a Liberal Democrat, and he's also a Norwich City fan. So if nothing else, he's an optimist. Some might say a masochist. He's a bit of a rare beast in the Westminster jungle, in as much as he's a minister prepared to speak with integrity and passion. Not too many of them around. Indeed, he speaks with a lot of compassion and has been unequivocal, and I'm grateful for it, in his support for parity of esteem between physical and mental health. If we're going to see the transformational change that we need to see in wider service delivery, then one of the ingredients that we need is political courage. And this politician's got bags of political courage. It's my great pleasure to introduce Norman Lamb, MP, Minister for Care and Support.
Thank you very much indeed for that introduction, Stephen. And as the tweets kept coming from Stephen as Norwich City suffered relegation from the Premiership, I appreciated the taunting from this great man. And it's great to be back in Liverpool again. I really love this city. It's a real sense of being a great city, and the renovation work that they've done along the waterfront. It's just very impressive place. But two things have slightly unnerved me since getting here. First of all, the Luis Suarez signed Liverpool shirt in the hotel lobby. This man managed to score more goals in 3 games against Norwich City than our entire strike force did over the whole season. And then this morning, as I woke at 7 o'clock, frankly feeling fairly knackered after a late arrival last night, I see a tweet pop up from Jonathan Fagg, the very impressive Chief Executive of the Norwich CCG. Time for a run along the Albert Dock with Dr. John Griffiths before Norman Lamb opens day 2 of the NHS Confed Conference. Well, that made me feel really depressed. And then, interestingly, 6 minutes later, Jonathan Griffiths putting on running shoes now, so perhaps not quite the same enthusiasm from his running partner, but they're doing great things in Norwich, incidentally. So it was good to hear that they were present and correct. So I want to take this opportunity to talk about the challenge facing the NHS, what our approach should be to how we set about meeting that challenge, and the principles that I think we should apply to reform. But first I want to reflect on where the NHS stands after a year of soul-searching in the aftermath of the Francis report. There is a danger that in dealing with the absolutely necessary changes recommended by Francis, that we lose sight of everything that is good about the NHS. We can be left with a distorted view. So we must also look at the other side of the coin. Look at what, frankly, a remarkable institution has achieved and what a really extraordinary workforce is capable of. First, value for money. We're in the top 3 OECD countries in overall health performance, and we're ranked first on efficiency. That's something actually we should all be very proud of. Unit costs of the NHS compare favourably with any other system. So whenever you hear people talking about the great merits of other ways of doing things, just remember that we compare very well. And in the last 5 years, the NHS has managed, without large real terms increases in funding. This, as we all know, is completely unprecedented. And of course it means massive pressures. But despite that, the NHS has actually performed remarkably well. And this is an enormous testament to the workforce and also to the leadership across the system. For the amount that we spend on the NHS in comparison with other European countries, we achieve so much. And in fact, in many areas, we're leading the way. We have a leading role in improving dementia care across the G7. Mortality rates from stroke have fallen by 1/3, deaths from coronary heart disease down by 1/3, and despite increasing demand, more than 80% of patients are being treated and discharged from hospital on the same day. And I'm in a privileged position of seeing so many innovations firsthand when I visit local areas around the country in my role as Health Minister. And I just wanted to mention two in particular, areas that are often unsung, unnoticed by the wider public. But in Accrington, in Lancashire, visiting the Mental Health Trust there, seeing the work that they're doing as one of the pilots on using IAPT psychological therapies on people with severe and enduring mental health problems. Talking to the youngsters there, and indeed their families, hearing their stories about how this really impressive service had made such a difference to those youngsters' lives was extraordinarily inspiring. I found a tear in my eye as I heard some of the stories from youngsters about how they had been helped. This is in our NHS, in mental health services that have been under considerable pressure, but doing great work. And then I went just last week to the new youth service in Norfolk, in my own county of Norfolk, set up by, again, the Mental Health Trust, focusing on a non-medicalised model in many respects, easy access, non-stigmatised approach to supporting youngsters, working collaboratively with the third sector, breaking down that awful cliff edge that happens at the age of 18 for so many youngsters as they lose the support of CAM services in the traditional model and then wait to see whether anything replaces it. So they have a 12 to 25 service. And they're doing really, really good work, and it's inspiring to see it as a minister. So yes, there were serious failures identified by Francis, but there is also so much that we should be proud of. And as an institution, its founding principles, free at the point of use, based on clinical need, open to all, I strongly endorse. I believe fundamentally in the powerful sense of social solidarity that's the hallmark of the NHS. It is, in my view, essential that we map out a way forward which protects, safeguards and secures these principles. But although the principles may be set in stone, the finances to uphold those principles become ever more challenging. This year, countdown has begun to the next general election. And whatever government is in power after May 15, the finances of the NHS is going to be one of the most pressing issues that they will have to face. Over the last 4 years, as a government, we've made tough decisions on the economy, but at the same time, we've protected health funding. But even though we have maintained funding in real terms, health costs are predicted to rise at 4% a year and to continue doing so. And this imposes extraordinary pressures. The 2015 NHS Confed Challenge Declaration has highlighted NHS England's projection of a £30 billion a year funding gap by 2021. And we know that the NHS is not well designed to meet the health challenges of the 21st century, a point made by the Challenge Declaration. Our population is living longer. Over the next 25 years, the number of people over the age of 85 will more than double. That's just an extraordinary extra pressure on the system. Roughly 60% of the total health budget goes in treating people with long-term conditions like diabetes, dementia, and arthritis. And more people will be living with one or more long-term health condition. The number of people with 3 or more long-term conditions is set to increase from 1.9 million in 2008 to 2.9 million by 2018. All these things you all know. These and other challenges have been thoroughly and succinctly put in the Confederation's 2015 Challenge Declaration. And I didn't hear Rob speak yesterday, but I read the speech and I was really impressed. I found myself agreeing with so much of what he said. And I agree with you that we need a vision for the future which meets the needs of the people who use the health and care system and the high values which you all work under. The need for innovation and new ways of thinking is becoming ever more urgent. We need to think what changes we can make to the health and care system now so that we are prepared for the future. We need to be able to use whatever money we have now in the smartest possible way so that every penny is being used in the best possible way to support patients. Now, I want to talk about how we achieve that change, what my approach is to these challenges. The change we need isn't going to come from Whitehall. It isn't going to come through new diktats telling you what must be done. I suspect we've tested that approach to destruction. It has to change. So for me, as a Liberal Democrat, the approach now has to be very different. The change we need to see is going to come from the people in this room. I want to really unleash the power of innovation and reform that too often gets frustrated by a risk-averse culture which, it seems to me, has to change. Fundamentally, I want to move away from a system where great people achieve remarkable things despite the system, to one where far more people are achieving amazing advances because they're actually encouraged to do so. Now, the integration pioneers are an attempt to put this approach into action, a license to do things differently, with a commitment from the centre to remove barriers where they exist. We need national standards in place, absolutely. And we also, as many discussions between myself and Stephen have reinforced, we absolutely need those national standards to apply equitably between physical and mental health. It is surely unacceptable that we have very strong politically resonant access standards in physical health, nothing in mental health, which distorts the way the money is spent within the NHS. But subject to those national standards, you should be given the freedom to meet those standards and to develop your services in your own way. And as you embrace this new freedom and as you experiment with more different ways of providing care, we need to make sure that we evaluate these new ways of working. It's surely crucial that we learn as we go along, we understand what the evidence is actually showing us of the work that we are doing, so that we ensure that we spend those scarce resources as wisely as possible. Again, this lies at the heart of the pioneer approach. Innovate, evaluate, but then disseminate, share best practice as best we can, something in the past that we have not always been good at in the NHS. I want these pioneers and many other areas, because I absolutely recognise that there's amazing things going on in very many places across our country. I want them to be part of a movement of change, driven from the bottom up, not the top down. So you're encouraged to do things differently. But there is another crucial element to my preferred approach to reform. We will only get through these extraordinarily difficult financial times and secure the future of the NHS if we really unleash the power of the 1.3 million people in the NHS workforce to build on their ideas, their understanding and knowledge of the services that they provide. Too often, staff in the NHS don't feel empowered to develop their service, to innovate, to do things differently, to improve patient care. Yet there are also many organisations in the NHS which have shown that engaged staff can make huge improvements in care and in making the money go further. There is an extraordinary variation across the country. Look at the surveys of staff in our NHS institutions, from the best to the worst. The gap is enormous, and the evidence is there that engaged staff lead to great results. The social enterprises which have been established in recent years are building themselves an impressive track record, like in Bromley in South East London. In 2011, 750 staff of the PCT became Bromley Healthcare, an NHS spin-out and a mutual. 85% of the staff signed up for shares in the company and are involved in vital decisions of that organisation, including bidding for equipment from a £50,000 fund. How has this approach changed care? Well, it's improved it by, first of all, leg ulcer healing times down from 21 weeks to just 5, productivity up by 20%, and did not attends at clinics down from 13% to 3.5%. Engaged staff making a difference to their service. We can all learn a lot from organisations like Bromley Healthcare, like John Lewis, about how to achieve that similar approach. Employees with a stake, a sense of ownership, a determination to improve the service that they run. So again, my message is this: be prepared to innovate, to experiment. So that is my approach, a permissive NHS which encourages diversity, which evaluates, understanding the evidence, and which spreads good practice, and an NHS which liberates its workforce to lead change. And I'm so encouraged by what Simon Stevens has said so far about his determination to encourage diversity. So as we encourage local leaders to lead change, what principles should guide us? I want to set out 5 guiding principles. First, we need an obsessive focus on safe care to achieve the best possible results for patients. This may seem like a no-brainer, but we need to make sure that the system has the right incentives in place to support this, because right now it doesn't. Payments should be tied to patient outcomes. Such an approach is possible, and again, I really encourage local experimentation in payment approaches using local variations and local price settings. Last year, I visited Intermountain Health in Utah, a not-for-profit integrated care organisation. Their mantra is that the rigorous pursuit of patient safety also saves money and saves lives. They cut sepsis deaths of patients entering their emergency department by more than half. And it was clinically led. Their doctors, their A&E clinicians, designed a protocol which allowed them to spot sepsis cases and treat them as quickly as possible. Not only did they see mortality rates decrease dramatically, the average length of stay reduced by 20 hours, and their average cost per patient fell by nearly $3,000. This sort of approach can be replicated across our system as well, clinically led. The evidence for this is already obvious to most of you. The safer the patient's care is, the less likely they are to have complications following any procedure or being readmitted as an emergency. We have to embed this culture across the NHS, and I'm very much aware that very many of you are already making real advances in this direction. The second principle is a shift of focus from repair to prevention and preventing a deterioration of health. And I thought this really resonated throughout an interview that Simon Stevens gave last week. I completely agreed with him when he said, you cannot have a modern health system that is not treating older patients with dignity and compassion, supporting them at home, and ensuring targeted prevention of ill health. This will mean changing how we design incentives, moving away from incentivising activity to promoting prevention. Getting this right is difficult. So that's why we need that experimentation, to demonstrate that there is life after payment by results. Salford's approach to older people's care is a great example. The Council, the CCG, the Acute and Mental Health Foundation Trusts, as well as local GPs, have initiated an alliance model to support the needs of older people. Standards of care are shared between all organisations under a single contract. And in terms of reassurance to the Acute Trust that it will not be a loser as a result of better prevention, fewer people going into hospital, the core principles of the agreement set out that costs must be reduced at a greater rate than the loss of income that they suffer. And risk and benefit is shared across the system. Now, technology also can be a great help in preventing people's deterioration of health. Leeds Council, one of the pioneers, is working with all parts of the health and care system, with the NHS, with charities and the private sector, to come up with technological solutions to promote self-care. They're adopting new ways of working to support people take control of their health. So they're making it easier for patients to access health services using their phone. New websites with information on how to manage long-term conditions. New devices like blood pressure monitors in people's homes. and support for local businesses seeking to create patient-focused apps. We've only just started on the journey of the potential for technology to make real differences for people's lives. So the third principle is a shift from what I would call a rather exclusive system where statutory services do their thing without a greater engagement or a sufficient engagement with the wider community to one that is much more inclusive. Statutory services, we all know, can't do it on their own. We can offer better care, but also crucially, help people to lead happier lives, which ultimately surely is what we're all after, and make the system more sustainable by involving the wider community more effectively. Take the impact of loneliness. Campaign to End Loneliness has estimated that for elderly people who are experiencing loneliness every day, it can be as bad for their health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. We know of the clear link between people living lonely, isolated lives and a deterioration of their physical and their mental health. And there is lots of great innovation going on. So if you go to Cornwall, the pioneer there, an extraordinarily exciting project for me. I went and visited them recently. GPs working alongside a network of volunteers in their communities. It started off in Newquay. They have seen in a small pilot just 100 older people living on their own, an extraordinary reduction of about 30% of avoidable emergency admissions. They've now extended it to Penwith with 1,000 patients. Their ambition is to get it across the whole of their county. This is very early days, but this new partnership between primary care and the wider community looks to me really interesting and something that we should be following very closely. And then also a visit to Sandwell in the West Midlands, to the poorest borough in that part, to the poorest ward in that borough in the West Midlands. And I visited an organisation called Friends and Neighbours, a community action organisation, nothing to do with health and care, but their network of volunteers in a very poor community, a whole load of people willing to give of themselves, helping to give people their lives back. The elderly lady for whom church is really important, but who hadn't been able to get to church for some 2 years. The volunteer who goes along and takes her to church, giving her meaning back in her life. And the extraordinary thing is that they were saying that they were already seeing a reduction in dependency, a reduction in reliance on the health and the care system. These are the things that we have to experiment with if we're to ensure that we have a sustainable system. Also, if we're to ensure that we address what has, I think, in a way become an inadvertent, neglectful society where so many people are living lonely lives on our own streets and their health, their mental and their physical health deteriorates as a result. The fourth is a shift from paternalistic to acutely personal, putting the person, the patient, the user of services in as much control as possible. Services designed around the user, getting them more involved in their care if we want to be able to meet their needs. So from October, there will be a right to a personal health budget for people on NHS continuing care. It's the first time in the NHS people are given control of the resources that are available for their care. The pilot on personal health budgets has already shown how having a personal health budget can help change people's lives. When asked how a budget helps them, 300 people involved in the pilot described the difference as living, not existing. Nearly 3/4 of them said it had a positive impact on their independence and on their health. So the fifth and final shift is from fragmented, horribly fragmented system to one that focuses on joined-up care, not structural change, focusing on the model of care. We've managed over time to institutionally fragment our health and care system. As a patient, you have to deal with numerous institutional separations: health and care, mental health and physical health, primary and secondary care. None of this makes sense from the patient's perspective. And with such divisions, what happens? Patients fall through the gaps, communication can be poor and can lead to poor patient care. So to meet the big challenge of the 21st century, people living longer with a mix of physical and mental health conditions, services need to be joined up much more to meet those needs better, a strategy that will treat the whole person, not structural change, a change to the model of care. I've been leading the work on this in the department. The 14 pioneers have been doing excellent work, uncovering new and exciting ways of working, which has been translated into real improvements in care. Many more areas are now innovating in exciting ways. When you discover that 99 areas of the country applied to become pioneers without a penny of money being offered by the department, you realise the enormous pent-up energy that's out there, the desire to do things differently. For example, people over 65 can wait up to 42 days to be transferred to a care home or a community hospital from the acute hospital. But pioneer sites in Staffordshire, in Worcestershire and Barnsley have been able to cut that wait down to at times just 4 days. And South Devon and Torbay working to provide mental health support in schools. That incredibly important early preventive work, focusing on mental well-being, not dealing with the damage once it's been caused, screening more young people for mental health issues, and putting mental health workers in more GP surgeries. This is exemplary, and I want much more of it. I'm happy to announce today that an extra £1.2 million of funding is going to support our pioneers. The money will be split equally, £90,000 for each area, between those 14 areas, to bring in whatever support they need to help make integration in their areas happen quicker and more effectively. But critically, the value can be to the whole of the NHS. As I said earlier, experiment, evaluate and disseminate, spread that best practice. The approach is to identify the barriers that stand in the way and to help remove them. We will continue to work with the pioneers, with NHS England, to make sure they continue to achieve results and encourage innovation. And nowhere is this experimentation needed more than the divide between mental and physical health. People with a condition like schizophrenia are twice as likely to smoke, twice as likely to be obese, and up to 3 times more likely to have high blood pressure. On average, those with severe and enduring mental health problems die 15 to 20 years earlier than the general population. That, for me, and I suspect for all of you, is completely unacceptable and has to change. We need more work which joins both physical and mental health. Work of people like Andre Tiley, who I met recently at the Institute of Psychiatry at King's College. He's done excellent work recognising the vital need for integrated care for people with long-term conditions. He found that patients with coronary heart disease often have comorbid depression, and that there is an opportunity for psychological and behavioural approaches to have a real potential to improve the results for those patients, improving their physical as well as their mental health, reducing costs to the system. And in South London and Maudsley too, they've adopted a similar approach with diabetes care for mental health patients. Patients with poor diabetes control are provided with a combination of intensive medical, psychiatric and social care. It involves a partnership between the Acute Trust, Mental Health Trust and a third sector organisation which delivers social care. The service has been incredibly successful. There is evidence that patients who go on the programme have considerable improvements in diabetic control, which reduces costs, particularly associated with unscheduled care, and they recently won a BMJ award for their efforts. This is the type of foresight that I want to see across the health and care system. The Better Care Fund is designed to get every area working to achieve more joined-up care. Now, initially, we thought that we would pool the health and care budgets to the tune of about £3.8 billion. But because of enthusiasm, actually across the system, and the innovation behind the locally agreed plans, we now have £5.2 billion available and pooled. But with that enthusiasm also comes understandable apprehension. The system is under a lot of pressure. I know that. And there is concern over whether new ways of working will deliver the reductions in acute admissions. This is exactly why we have asked for these plans a year in advance, so that they can be rigorously checked and tested. Initial plans will be agreed through a specific team in NHS England, and all final plans come to the department for sign-off. Simon Stevens is insisting on real rigour in the process, and I welcome that. But these are locally designed plans to achieve change. And that example I gave you from Salford, where there's a deal done to ensure that the savings achieved are more than the loss of income from the acute trust. This is the sort of approach, it seems to me, that is needed. And it's a difficult process, but it needs to be if we want to ensure plans are challenging, ambitious and robust. But I do think that there is a wide recognition that this is the right direction. This is part of my vision. And ultimately, I think the whole health and care budget should be pooled. It doesn't actually surely make sense to have two separate budgets in a local area, two organisations doing the commissioning. So I would like my party's manifesto to argue for a legal obligation to pool the whole resource for health and care in a local area. We should end the disputes about who pays for care. The whole spectrum of care, from the social end to the acute end, is surely interrelated. But again, I would allow each local area to determine exactly how they want to achieve that. No top-down reorganisation, no top-down restructuring, local areas deciding how to maximise the potential of a pooled budget. So, the NHS and care services has already achieved an extraordinary amount in incredibly difficult financial circumstances. But it's our duty, all of us, to now look further ahead, not just at next year, but in 10 and 20 years' time. I really welcome the can-do attitude of the NHS Confederation through its declaration. Too often we've dealt with the pressing issues of now, but I think what we will measure the real strength, the true ingenuity of the £1.3 million people in the health service, that is how we prepare ourselves for the future. So I'm an optimist. If we can build a shared vision of the changes we need to make, if we can build a culture which encourages and promotes innovation and experimentation and then spreads best practice, if we can unleash the power of our remarkable NHS workforce, then I think there is no limit to what we can achieve. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Norman, for that very clear resume of your vision for the future. I'm going to invite Carolyn now first to just give a quick response to Norman's speech.
Good morning, everybody. And Norman, that was a really impressive speech, I have to say. And there was very little that you said with which I personally would disagree. I'll just go back, actually, to the 5 principles that you have raised and your welcome in relation to local decision-making and the fact that different communities require different and diverse responses. And that is something from a local government perspective which we totally and completely endorse and indeed welcome. And we absolutely share your view that change won't come top-down, driven from Whitehall, but from colleagues both in health and social care who will work together to make the system better. Some comments on your final bit around integration and the pooling of budgets and the Better Care Fund, all of which actually we agree. And through the Local Government Association, we are very clear that if this agenda is going to be successful going forward, we do need to have single commissioning of and integrated delivery of adult and social care and health services. And the Local Government Association, I don't think, has a view specifically on the legal requirement to pool budgets, but we very much think that local authorities and indeed the NHS should be encouraged to combine the whole of our budgets. So we have 14 billion in adult social care provision, which is still a lot of money despite the significant reductions that have been taken. And we definitely think that that whole amount of money should be considered as a part of pooling. Having said that, integration, even within, and transformation, even within an organisation, is hard. So integration between different bodies with different cultures is even harder. And I think we really need to think carefully about how do we really, really facilitate the level of transformation that is required for our future demographic pressures. And I think we would say that the next government, whoever they might be, should seriously, seriously consider a longer-term funding settlement for the whole Parliament, for both local government and indeed the NHS, which would give us a much longer period over which we will be able to work together and actually pool budgets to actually get the most cost-efficient care and indeed, more importantly, the best possible care for people in our communities. And to do that, we genuinely think that you don't save to invest. You do invest to save. And people really do, and government needs to think about finding an incentivised mechanism which will facilitate transformation, really heavily incentivised, and that might mean one-off injection of cash for double funding whilst the transition takes place. I think that one-off funding will be paid back in spades in terms of better care and more cost-effective care by the end of Parliament if we have a long-term financial settlement.
Thanks for that, Carolyn. I'm quickly going to move on to Steve because I want a few minutes for the audience to ask Norman some questions. So, Steve, if you could give a CCG view of the world.
I think we need to reflect first on the year of clinical commissioning that we've had. You've highlighted a number of examples there where the changes that you talk about are happening. And certainly CCGs are embracing the opportunity, I think, to work with local authorities, to work with providers to make services better. And this isn't a case of NHS versus local authority. We both want the same things. We both want to deliver better services for patients, and we're seeing the benefits of working together, absolutely. So we're travelling in the right direction, and integration is absolutely the right direction. However, as a CCG leader and other CCGs, I think will say the same thing. We would be concerned about the top-down legal requirement to do this. So the Better Care Fund is a move in the right direction, but what we need is local solutions. So the localism part is working with local relationships to decide what's best for our populations. And this top-down edict of you must, there's a legal requirement to pool budgets without looking at local need, what's best for your local population, what works best with your elected members, I think is the way forward rather than a top-down edict, which in effect leads to a reorganisation of commissioning. And we need to keep this clinical focus. It isn't all about clinicians by any means, but we've seen the effect that it's had of engaging clinicians both in primary care and secondary care and mental health services when we talk about commissioning and services for patients. And usually that does bring in social care. And we've seen changes as local authorities have more pressures on them. We've seen CCGs start to fund social care. We've seen CCGs start to redesign social care and hospitals look to provide social care. And I think that's right, but it reflects the pressures in the system and the fact that we are working on this. So I think my feeling is no to a top-down legal requirement, but keep that local solution, and the ability to do it where it's right, I think is absolutely important. Just one last point really, which is about the NHS Clinical Commissioners called last year, as did a number of organisations, for politics to be kept out of the NHS where we can, to be allowed to have the space, the time to deliver local clinically led change with our populations. And I think that's really important, and I think the pooling of budgets by definition brings politics closer into the NHS and may make change harder.
Thanks. Can we just hold on to those responses, but I really do want to just take the last couple of minutes to get questions from the audience. So if we've got any questions, can you stick your hand up? We've got a number 2 paddle over there.
Hello, Chloe Carter from the British Red Cross. Just thinking about integration and the role that the Better Care Fund can play, the voluntary sector has a really crucial role in making that a success. And we're very grateful at the Red Cross for the support that the Minister has shown. He's seen what we do in our services and the important preventative role that the voluntary sector can support. Is there going to be a greater call for health and wellbeing boards, CCGs, local councils to to engage with the voluntary sector and to work with them to make sure that the Better Care Fund is the success that we all would like it to be, and to learn the lessons from the Change Fund in Scotland, where that engagement has been mandated because the first year of that Change Fund did not drive the innovation and integration that was hoped for.
Well, first of all, thanks for giving a bit of a plug for the Red Cross. Very good organisation, and I visited a couple in my constituency in the village of Trunch, and an intervention from Red Cross, nothing to do with health or care, but just helping a couple who, interestingly, this wasn't someone living on their own, this was a couple, but who together had become incredibly lonely, who'd lost friends and neighbours as people moved away or died or whatever, and they'd become totally isolated from their community. And the Red Cross volunteer managed to reconnect them to their community in a very, very simple way, but it just made a massive difference to their lives. For the old boy who had become terribly depressed, and I think for whose wife it had become incredibly difficult coping with him. That connection from Red Cross had made all the difference. So for me, and I tried to sort of get this across in the speech, the voluntary sector and the wider community is completely fundamental to this. I'm sort of instinctively opposed to mandating how services are provided locally, but my message is incredibly clear that I think there is a fundamental role for the voluntary sector who can reach parts that others can't. And that collaboration, that inclusive approach, the fifth principle that I talked about, I think can be incredibly valuable in making the system sustainable, but critically in just giving people happier lives.
I'm just going to take in the 30 seconds that we've got, one last succinct question and answer, number one over there.
Hi, Julia Ross from Care and Health Track. I'll make it really, really simple. Norman, I think you're aware of this, but one of the major barriers at the moment in integrating data and having confidence about pooling budgets is the lack of confidence and confusion about being able to share data across health and social care. Could you say when and how this will be resolved?
Well, it's music to my ears hearing you raise this, because last summer when we were I spoke at a conference of health and care professionals, and I asked the question to the audience about problems, challenges they have in sharing information to provide good care for patients. And there was just this overwhelming sense in the room of the frustration that they suffer from the barriers, the obstacles in the way to sharing information, both in a sense the sort of technological barriers, the fact that we are still so far away from being able to electronically share information, despite billions of pounds being spent through the National Programme for IT, but also just the sort of the bureaucratic rules that in many areas get in the way of good sharing of information between providers. We're very close to issuing guidance that we're hoping that everyone will sign up to, which in effect gets across the message that there is a duty to share. It's not an optional extra. To provide good care, there is a duty to share. And we know that all of the scandals that happen where there have been complete failures of care, it's so often because of a failure of communication between organisations. So this is of fundamental importance. It's also incidentally important to address the problem of sharing between providers and commissioners. If we're doing risk stratification, for example, critical to a good integrated approach, you've got to be able to share the necessary information. So for me, this is one of the barriers that I hope and expect the pioneers to lead the way in addressing. And we've been going through a process with the pioneers. We did a deep dive into Southend, looking at their problems in sharing information. And I think we're making real progress, and you will hear further on the subject very soon.
Somebody came up to me before and put a sign up, and apparently Steve's just told me it said that we can go till 10 o'clock. I thought it said you've only got 10 minutes.
Oh, I should have got away with it.
I should have gone to Specsavers, but so can I ask you a question, Norman? Because I'm the chair, and Rob will probably never ask me to chair anything ever again. can I just ask you about, I called you an optimist before. I mean, what's your optimism that colleagues in this government and indeed in a future government would entertain the idea of actually putting their personal popularity with constituents aside to allow transformation that we're going to need to do if we're going to face some of the challenges ahead of us?
Well, I recognise this is a real problem, and the instinctive temptation for a politician is to just fight to defend a service. And sometimes for good reason, but sometimes it can stand in the way of actually achieving better care for patients and a more rational use of the resources that are available. For me, I think part of the problem is that there is an extraordinary gap between what we all know in this room about the challenges that the system faces and what needs to be done to both improve care and to make it sustainable, and what the general public knows. And I strongly favour a sort of a very deliberate national conversation about how we sustain the NHS and care services. I think there's an enormous need to inform and explain the challenge, the sort of existential challenge that we face. And I think, and incidentally, in Canada in the 1990s, where they faced an extraordinarily tight financial budgetary situation, they did this sort of approach. And actually by trusting people, by going out and engaging with them, they were able to make changes that I think otherwise would have been impossible. If you impose a change without engaging, people will naturally resist, including politicians. If we can explain and put the tough choices, the difficult dilemmas that we face to people and seek to engage the public in that discussion about something that actually everyone cares so passionately about, then I think we might just start to see a more rational way forward.
Okay, can I just ask any questions from either of you two before we wrap up?
No, I have no questions.
No? Okay, can we thank Norman and the other contributors for today, and thank you for coming to this session. Thank you very much.